There was a town here, houses, schools, a church, families who had lived there for generations, and then one day, a decision was made. Not by the people who lived there, by people they had never met, in rooms they would never enter. The town was cleared, the buildings were taken, the name was removed from every map, and the people were told to forget it ever existed. Most of the world did. Tonight we remember. Welcome to Veiled Meridian. Tonight we go to the town that was taken off the map. And we do not leave until we understand exactly who erased it, exactly why, and exactly what they needed to make sure the world would never be allowed to see. Governments have always known that maps are power. Before we go to the town, we need to understand the instrument that was used against it. Because the map is not a neutral document, it never has been. A map is a political object. It is a statement about what exists, what matters, and what the authority that produced it has decided the world should be allowed to know. Every map ever made reflects the interests of the entity that commissioned it, and every map ever made contains, in its omissions, a record of what that entity needed to make invisible. The history of cartographic suppression is longer and more deliberate than most people realize. Colonial powers routinely produced maps that erased indigenous settlements not because those settlements did not exist, but because acknowledging their existence complicated the legal and moral architecture of the colonial project. Military maps have always contained intentional inaccuracies in areas of strategic sensitivity. Soviet cartography, the most extensively documented example of systematic map falsification in history, deliberately introduced errors into publicly available maps of Soviet territory on a scale so comprehensive that Western intelligence agencies spent decades unable to trust any Soviet-produced geographic document. Towns were removed from Soviet maps not as isolated incidents, but as standard procedure, when those towns served functions the state needed to keep secret. Entire cities with populations in the hundreds of thousands appeared on no publicly available map for decades. The people who lived in them could not receive mail at their actual address. Their location did not officially exist, and the world outside the borders of the Soviet state had, for the duration of that erasure, no way of knowing that those cities were there. This was not a Soviet invention. It was a Soviet perfection of something that governments had been doing, at smaller scales and with less bureaucratic efficiency, for as long as governments and maps had coexisted. The town we are discussing tonight was erased by a government using exactly this logic that if the map does not show it, then for all practical purposes, it does not exist. And if it does not exist, then what was done there does not require an explanation. The people were removed before the name was. The erasure of a town from a map is the final step in a process. It is the administrative conclusion of something that began much earlier and much more violently, with the removal of the people who lived there. In the cases that have been most extensively documented, the sequence is consistent. A decision is made, at the governmental level, that a particular area of land is needed for a purpose that cannot coexist with a civilian population. The purpose is almost always one of three things: military, industrial, or experimental. The common thread running through all three is that what is planned for the land requires that no one who is not directly involved in it can witness what happens there. The residents are informed, sometimes with genuine notice, more often without. They are told that they must leave. They are given, in some cases, compensation that bears no relationship to what they are actually losing. In other cases, they are given nothing except the information that they are leaving and the date by which they will have done so. They leave. They have to. The authority behind the order is not the kind that allows for refusal, and then the buildings come down, or are repurposed in ways that erase their original character, and the infrastructure that connected the town to the surrounding region is severed, and the name disappears from the official record, and the cartographer's government employees doing what government employees do, which is what they are instructed to do, remove the town from the map, and the people who were removed carry the town inside them, in their memories. In the specific weight of grief that belongs to losing a place, rather than a person, the particular devastation of knowing that the streets you walked as a child, the building where you went to school, the ground where your family is buried, have been taken from the map as if they never mattered enough to mark. That grief does not diminish with time. It is transmitted, and it is one of the most persistent forms of evidence that the erasure, for all its thoroughness, was never complete. What replaced the town was always worse than what they admitted. The official reason given for the clearance of a town, when any reason is given at all, is almost never the complete reason. It is the reason that was selected because it was the most defensible, the most abstract, and the least likely to generate the kind of public scrutiny that the actual reason could not survive. National security, infrastructure development, environmental remediation, industrial expansion. These are the categories into which the official explanations invariably fall. They are not always false, but they are almost always incomplete. Because the full truth of what the cleared land was used for, what was built on it, what was tested on it, what was done there in the years after the population was removed, is in most documented cases significantly more disturbing than the explanation that was given to the people who were displaced. Weapons testing programs have been conducted on cleared civilian land in ways that left contamination levels the government did not disclose for decades. Industrial facilities built on cleared towns have released materials into the surrounding environment that the official environmental record does not account for. Military installations built on displaced communities have conducted activities that remained classified long after the strategic rationale for the classification had expired, remaining classified not because ongoing operations required secrecy, but because the historical record of what had occurred required it. The pattern across documented cases is consistent. The people are removed. The real use begins. The real use generates consequences, environmental, human, political, that the official explanation was specifically constructed to make impossible to connect to the displaced community. And by the time the full picture is available, the people who made the original decision are gone. The accountability has dissolved into institutional diffusion, and the families of the people who were removed are left with the knowledge of what was taken from them and no mechanism to obtain justice for it. The archives. They didn't destroy, tell everything. Every erasure has a gap. No matter how comprehensive the suppression, no matter how thoroughly the public-facing record has been sanitized, somewhere in the bureaucratic architecture of the state that conducted the erasure, there are documents that were not destroyed, files that were misfiled, correspondence that was archived rather than shredded, internal reports that circulated widely enough that copies ended up in places the erasure did not reach. These documents are the mechanism through which erased towns come back. Not physically, the land is rarely returned, the buildings are rarely rebuilt, the people are almost never made whole. But historically, the record is recovered. The gap between the official explanation and the actual events closes. And the town, which was removed from the map to prevent exactly this kind of accounting, becomes visible again in the only form that erasure cannot permanently eliminate as evidence of what was done and who did it. Historians and investigative journalists who have worked through the archives of states with documented histories of town erasure consistently describe the same experience. The official record is thin, circular, and constructed around the stated justification. And then, in a different filing system, in a different department, sometimes in a different country entirely, a document surfaces that was never meant to be found, an internal memo, a budget allocation, a correspondence between two officials who understood each other well enough not to use careful language. And in that document, the actual reason appears, unguarded, clear, written by people who were certain they were writing for an audience that would never include the public. Those documents exist for the town on tonight's episode. They have been partially recovered. They are incomplete. The erasure was thorough enough that the complete picture requires inference from what survives. But what survives is sufficient to understand that the official explanation and the actual events are separated by a distance that no honest accounting can bridge. Some of these towns are still erased right now. This is the truth that is most important and most consistently absent from how these stories are told, when they are told at all. The town erasures of the 20th century are presented, when they are acknowledged, as historical events, as things that happened in a different era, under different governments, in a world with different standards of accountability and transparency than the one we currently inhabit. They are framed as past failures of past systems, regrettable, documented, and resolved by the passage of time and the improvement of governance. They are not resolved, and the category is not closed. Satellite imagery analysis conducted by independent researchers in the past decade has identified areas in multiple countries, including countries that present themselves as open, democratic, and fully accountable to international norms, where populated settlements, visible in historical imagery, are absent from current official mapping, where the coordinates resolve to unmarked land, where the geographic record and the photographic record tell different stories about what exists at a specific location. The tools of erasure have modernized alongside everything else. The cartographic suppression that required teams of government employees manually altering paper maps in the 20th century can now be accomplished through the administration of digital geographic databases that underlie the mapping applications that most of the world uses to understand where things are and what exists. An entry removed from a database leaves no visible scar. The map simply does not show it, and the map for most people is reality. There are towns being erased right now, not in the past, now, on maps that you have used, in countries that you trust, for reasons that have not been given and will not be given until someone finds the document that was not destroyed and the institution loses control of the narrative it built to replace the truth.